Episode 4 of Frozen Planet is called Autumn, and it's about autumn at the poles. So we open up, as we usually do, with polar bears. We see polar bears are kind of waiting for the ice to come back. They're hanging around a lot. We see a lot of them hanging around the coast. And we see a lot of males play fighting. It's kind of nice to see. I think at the time we hadn't seen as much footage of male polar bears kind of interacting, so it maybe seemed like more of a surprise. Today, however, we've seen that quite a lot. So the sequence doesn't seem as surprising, but it's still alright, it's still a nice enough sequence. We also see belugas, we see them coming into Hudson Bay in Canada, and we see them rubbing themselves against rocks, but basically like a bit of a spa treatment. I think that footage maybe today seems a little bit dated, just because at the time they weren't using drones. Obviously today you'd use drones for that kind of footage, and you'd get a much more in-depth look. There you kind of feel like they're restricted by the helicopter they were using at the time that was kind of pioneered in planet Earth, but it's still a good bit of footage. Then we start talking about seabirds, we see guillemots leaving the nest when the chicks are ready to fledge. It's nothing I hadn't seen before in the life of mammals, especially with the Arctic foxes taking them, but it's still alright. And then when we start seeing the migrants leaving, a lot of birds flying away, the guillemots actually have to swim because the chicks can't fly yet. That was interesting, I didn't really know that. And then we see a whale carcass that's washed up, and that's great for all the animals that stick around, especially the polar bears. And then the ocean freezes and we basically move into winter. Further south we see the tundra, we see musk oxen fighting, that's really good. Again, I think I've seen a few musk oxen fights, and I think I've seen probably better ones filmed since, but it's still really good. Again, it's a good in-depth look at muskox. The caribou as well is also pretty good. You don't really see caribou a lot in this series. To be fair, considering it's Frozen Planet, you'd think they'd pop up a lot more. But here it's interesting, and it's actually a bit different. Usually you just see caribou getting chased by wolves or trying to evade flies. Here you see them mating. We see this female having to run away from all these males, and this one male who's, a lot bigger than the rest of them, having to fight them off. And at the end, when he kind of catches up to her and it looks like, she's going to receive him, every time he looks around, he scares the rest of them away. That's quite funny. I think the Arctic stuff in this episode was kind of okay. It wasn't as good as it was in previous episodes. And then we go to the Antarctic. We start off in South Georgia, as we usually do. Here we don't see the usual casting characters. There's no elephant seals, king penguins, or fur seals. We do see giant petrels, though. They're an animal that I quite like. I think they just look quite cool. They are pretty minging. I mean, they're basically just vultures of the sea. They look like pretty minging albatrosses, basically. And we see that a seal carcass washes up at the beach, and they're just going for it. I mean, we just see them feeding on this carcass, and it's pretty minging. Their faces are coated in blood, pretty rank. What's really interesting about that sequence, though, is that because they open up this carcass, other animals are able to get into it. That includes pintail ducks. It's really weird seeing these little, quite cute little ducks eating a seal carcass. I think this was shown before in Life in the Freezer, which is kind of a prelude to this whole series, to be honest. And I like giant petrels. We don't see them too often in these programmes, even though they're one of the few animals that is found in Antarctica, but they don't seem to get a lot of screen time, so I'm glad we got a pretty extended look at them here. And then we go to the Adelie penguins, as we usually do. It's kind of a fun sequence for a bit. We see the chicks are a lot bigger, they're chasing their parents around trying to get food. That's quite funny. It's funny up until the point where they say that this one chick might not make it, so the parents are just going to focus on their other chick. It went from being really fun to just quite bleak and depressing. And then we see the adults leaving and the chicks have got to fend for themselves. They've got to head out into the ocean and they get attacked by a leopard seal. I figured we'd probably get a leopard seal sequence in this series. I mean, it's a series that deals with Antarctica in pretty much every episode, so you'd expect at least one leopard seal footage. What I liked about this sequence is it doesn't go on for too long. We've seen loads of leopard seal sequences. We've seen them tearing apart penguins. We've seen them hunting penguins. We've seen it from the leopard seal's perspective before. There wasn't a lot they really could do at this point. In series like Seven Worlds, One Planet did add a new perspective with things like drone footage, but this time we didn't really have anything new to add to that sequence, I don't think. So it was fine that we just saw them catching a penguin and leaving. We didn't need much more of that, so I'm glad that sequence didn't go on for too long. At the end of the episode, we see emperor penguins coming in. So again, for considering emperor penguins are probably the most iconic Antarctic animal, this is the first time we see them in the series, apart from the first episode. I think they may have popped up there. But I like the emperor penguin sequence. The shots of them jumping out the water, and they're obviously massive, are pretty great. That's one of the more memorable things of the series for me. I just think the shots are great. It's really well filmed. I really like it. Again, them travelling inland is all really good as well. Again, it's quite funny. Emperor penguins do lend themselves to being quite funny because they look stupid when they're walking, especially being as big as they are. They're falling over the ice, especially when one of them slips over. Its head just disappears in amongst the ice and it gets back up. That's hilarious. Them just tobogganing along is great as well. And eventually they're able to get to their breeding grounds, and that's where we see the kind of usual stuff, them mating, them passing the egg over. And as much as this sequence is quite fun and quite funny, it does set up how difficult the next episode's going to be for them, because winter is the harshest time of year for anything. This episode does a really good job at the end of setting you up for that, because it is like, okay, we've had the fun stuff, the series has gotten progressively more bleak as the episodes have gone on. This is where things are going to get, really harsh. And I like that, because the next episode is the harshest episode of the series. and it is, from memory, pretty good. So I really like that. So then the diaries is all about the people filming the emperor penguins coming out of the water. It's quite fun. I mean, it's one of the more light-hearted diary sequences. It's kind of similar to the daily penguin one. We just see them living amongst the penguins. The penguins are investigating them having to travel through the ice following the penguins because maps and compasses are no good down there. We also see them getting harassed by leopard seal for a bit. That's quite cool. Again, it's good to see the leopard seals are there. The penguins jump out the water and they're just crashing into them. That's great. I really like the sequence underwater where we see the penguins swimming about. That's really good. Again, that's a really good sequence. It's something you don't see that often. I think Blue Planet and Here are probably the only ones that I remember from a BBC series anyway. So I really like that as well. So yeah, this episode is pretty good, and I don't think it's as good as the episodes that came before it. It's a bit weaker, especially with the Arctic stuff, in my opinion, but it's still pretty good. I think the highlights for me were the Emperor Penguins at the end and the giant petrels. But I mean, I did enjoy it. It was still a pretty good episode overall. So yeah, what were your thoughts? What were your highlights? Let me know in the comments below. As ever, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, or don't if you don't want to. It's perfectly fine. I'll be doing the winter episode next, so look forward to that. Yeah, I'll see you next week, and goodbye.